Hello everybody, today I am driving the car called by some the thinking man's M5. This is an E39 generation BMW 540i, and it is widely considered to be one of the finest automobiles ever produced. But in today's video, I'm going to be asking the all-important question: is that simply a case of rose-tinted spectacles, or is it really, even in 2024, near 30 years after its release, that good? Let's find out. The E39 Generation 5 series landed in 1995, replacing the much-loved and I think rather cool E34. Just in case you are wondering, that is the last series to feature round headlights. And I actually owned an example of an E34 a while ago, a very rare 530i with the short-lived 3-litre V8, a car that I dubbed Callisto, which made a fabulous noise and, if I ever had the chance, would probably buy back. Here we go. But sadly, at the time, I couldn't afford to keep it, and so sold it. Every now and again, I do check the classifieds to see if it's still out there, but alas, thus far, I have been unsuccessful. In any case, the E39 really was a massive step change for BMW. They upped their game in an incredible way, and you could argue this really is one of the very first modern BMWs. To get in it now, yes, sure, there are elements that feel dated. The little, almost dot matrix looking display below the analog gauges. The window switches are still rather quaint. And compared to much of modern traffic, it actually doesn't even look all that big either. The back seats have still got just about enough room that you can get 4 adults in here with comfort, and the boot is a good size too. But today, a 5 Series no longer feels like the large car that it once was. There are also other ways in which this car is a glorious blend of the old and the new. When it comes to powertrains, for example, at launch, there wasn't a single 4-cylinder engine available for the car. In fact, during its entire life, there was only ever one, the entry-level diesel. The entire rest of the range was made up of either 6 or 8-cylinder examples, with the best known, and I suppose most fondly remembered, being the fire-breathing M5, which in this generation came with a 400 horsepower, naturally aspirated 5-litre 8. And that is a mighty, mighty thing. But the M5 suffered from being, for a long time, relatively cheap and affordable, and then very, very quickly, not cheap or affordable at all, meaning there are a lot of examples out there at fairly punchy prices which still likely need quite a bit of work. And for those who never needed the performance that the M5 offered, there are a host of other fairly brilliant engines to choose from, and the pick for many, I think, would likely be one of BMW's famous straight 6s, here either a 528, later a 530i, that being the M54 engine, same essentially as I had in my 330 Ci about 10 years ago. A magnificent masterpiece of mechanical engineering, and honestly, if you want the easiest old school 5 Series ownership experience, that's going to be the way to get it. This, though, is the 540i, and rather confusingly, that doesn't mean it's a 4-litre engine, in fact being a 4.4-litre. The code name of this engine is M62, and it puts out 286 horsepower, in early guise 310 pound-foot of torque, and here in later trim, the M62 TU, 325 pound-foot at marginally lower RPM, 3,600 versus 3,900. Just in case you are wondering, that's about 440 Newton meters. today, those would be numbers that are unlikely to impress even a hot hatch enthusiast. Back in the day, they were fairly good. And the reality is that near 300 horsepower and over 300 pound-foot of torque is adequate for the vast majority of situations. Even without having to put your foot all the way down when it comes to pulling away at a junction, this car is an absolute delight. Now, the biggest problem for many, which actually for others would be an advantage in comparison to the M5, is the choice of gearboxes. Because if you went for the full fat M, you didn't have one. You got a 6-speed manual, which today, of course, I think is certainly partly responsible for it being the legend that it is. However, this could have also been optioned with a 6-speed manual, I believe actually the exact same box, or, as it was most commonly seen, with this, a 5-speed automatic. And though I know just about every petrolhead out there would have been looking at this car going, oh yeah, I like that, and the moment they've seen that gone, that's a shame. You know, there's actually a lot to be said for it. And this, I think, is very interesting because you see, this automatic gearbox is actually something that appealed to this car's buyer, Alex, because he bought it as something that he wanted to be able to use, drive and enjoy at the weekends with his family, which includes a baby, so he's not going to be driving all that fast. He also lives in London, where, let's be honest, a manual is just a frustration, and so for him, this was the option that just made sense. What is also interesting about this car is it's a Japanese import, and this seems to be an increasingly common thing of late, because though many people would question why on earth you would get a car built in Germany from Japan, the fact is that because for such a long time they were relatively cheap here and the Japanese don't salt their roads, there is a good chance that most of the cars coming from Japan will be in better condition. However, it is also absolutely vital that I point out that is not necessarily the case. In fact, when Alex went to look at this, he also compared it with another 530i, the 6-cylinder variant. And despite coming from the same place and being essentially the same age, that underneath was as crusty as SpongeBob's favourite burger. The other thing that you absolutely must be aware of and cannot ignore if you're considering a car like this is, though they developed a reputation for bulletproof reliability and incredible build quality, which they certainly earned, these are not cars immune to requiring maintenance. At the end of the day, they are a 1.7-ish ton executive German saloon. They will wear through components, and because they were very cheap for a very long time, they got bought by people who simply couldn't keep up with the maintenance. So even this, which at first glance appeared to be a very good car, over the last sort of 6 years has had about £9,000 out of Alex in maintenance, with 1 year in particular costing him about £4,000. Work he has done has included quite a bit to the suspension, so this car is now sat on a Bilstein coilover setup. And though my preference would always be for the original, the fact is, to do that would have cost about triple what putting the Bilsteins on did. Bushings and various other components have also been changed, which is entirely normal with any vehicle of this age, and those stuff like brake discs and pads and the like are not going to be particularly expensive, nor is things like oil changes and that sort of stuff. There will always be things that need tending to. When he got the car, it had a leaky rocker cover gasket, and he took it to a local independent to get it fixed, but they didn't fix it properly. So, frustrated, he decided to go and look for a proper specialist, and happened upon BMR Performance down near Gatwick, who he is very happy to say have done a fantastic job looking after the car over the last few years. Though in the last few years prices have certainly risen, and these are now viewed by just about everybody as a bona fide modern classic, the prices still aren't strong enough for people to be able to do a proper restoration job without losing their shirt. So if you really want the best ownership experience of one of these, I would say you'll get that by buying the finest example that you can to begin with. check underneath the car, because they're at that stage where rust may have taken hold in a way it's just going to be uneconomical to repair. But in good news, this is absolutely an example of a car you could drive day to day without even thinking about it. And I'm sure plenty of you out there are sat watching going like, well, yes, James, of course you can. It's a 5 Series. These came out in 1995, 29 years ago. And if you think for a second, when this car was new, that would have been a car from the 60s. It's a big difference, isn't it? To get in one of these now, it's lovely, it's wonderful, it has power steering, the gearbox is smooth enough, the windows are all electric, something that came in as a standard thing during this car's life, along with a whole bunch of other upgrades, including apparently a change for the auto box, whereby they switch the direction you have to pull the lever if you want to do it manually, so you then pulled it towards you for up, which is the correct direction. According to Wikipedia, this car should have that because it's a 2001 and has indeed many of the other upgrades that a 2001 should. By then the car had been facelifted, so the front end looked a little bit different. It was just sharpened up a tad, though to be honest, all E39s are good looking things. I mean, really good looking. Let's be honest here, the proportions of this car to me are just perfect. Now though, we should find out what it's like when you want to have a little bit of fun. What a fabulous engine. It does feel really properly punchy throughout the entirety of the rev range. The limit is fairly low at about 6,500, but honestly, it's not a problem. Oh, beautiful old Merc that. The only issue I'm currently having is that I keep forgetting the gear lever goes the wrong way, so I keep wanting to change down and change up and vice versa. In any case, I have absolutely no complaints whatsoever with the pace of the thing. It's plenty to have fun with. The traction control is rather basic and on occasion will intervene, as it probably should with the road being so damp and greasy today. It's warmed up compared with a few days ago, but that just means that all the ice has melted and now the roads I think are almost as treacherous as they were when they were frozen. Even so, I'm still enjoying this car. You do feel like you're sat relatively high up. The fact the car doesn't have masses and masses of power also means you can rev that engine out with relative safety. If I have one gripe though with the dynamics of it, that's the steering. I'd like to criticise the suspension, but the fact is, it's non-standard, and though it's a little too firm for my liking, I would like something like this to be set up more comfort orientated. This isn't how the car left the factory, nor is it how many other 540s will be, but the steering is. And this is another area that this car was a little bit of an anachronism, because you see, with this generation of car, though the 6-cylinder variants moved over to the modern rack and pinion steering system, the 8-cylinder variants, including the M5, kept the old recirculating ball. And that does come with a penalty in terms of complexity to maintain. If the thing needs rebuilding, it's a little bit awkward. But for me, more crucially, steering feel. It's a little vague, it's a little slow, it's not particularly responsive, and it does rob you of, I think, a crucial piece of interaction. Should you want to have a more spirited drive, but you don't want to row your own gears, if you push the lever over and don't change up or down, it'll engage a sport mode for the gearbox. And I've often found that can actually be the best way to enjoy these things, so I'm going to activate that and see what it's like. The car itself does not have a sport mode of any type whatsoever. The closest you've got really is a button down here for the traction control, which if you press it, will turn it off. Turning circle is not great. This car now has a reversing camera, courtesy of the little Extrons navigation system that's been fitted down here. And I've got to give these credit because they cost a few £100s, and they've actually put a little bit of effort into making it look like an OEM system. It blends in with the BMW buttons fairly well. This era of car, you would have got the old school nav system originally with a 4x3 screen, then later a widescreen, again as I had in my E46. But today they're sort of useless really, they don't do anything. Curiously and quite entertainingly, this car still has the gubbins for the nav system in the boot, including its original Japanese DVD nav disc, which is fantastic. That system also combines with a few of the car's existing creature comforts, including heated seats for the front passengers, dual zone climate control, and a blind at the back, electrically operated. It also has a sunroof, something I'm always keen on, and this makes it really a genuinely very usable thing, because there isn't, as far as I can think of it, a single feature in here that the car is lacking, which you'd get in a modern one, that's anything remotely close to important. Oh yes, it will kick down eventually, and I do like the sound this car makes. The exhaust is entirely standard. I was a little bit surprised when Alex told me that, because I looked at it and the pipe seemed to be just a little meatier than I thought, but he tells me, no, that's exactly how the car should be. And though when cruising it's perfectly quiet and respectable, you put your foot down and you get just that little distant burble, reminding you are in something a little bit spicier than normal. It's just about right, I think. I wouldn't want it much louder than this. If you're in an M5, I can understand why you want it to be a little more vocal, but I think this actually suits the character of the car quite nicely. You've also got to give BMW credit with this car, because it's also potentially one of the last where they were putting real serious effort into the fundamental mechanicals. They were improving the driving experience by making the car better. They weren't simply throwing gimmicks and technology at it. Today you look at a BMW catalogue and they're likely going to tell you how big their screen is compared to just about everybody else's. This, though, back in the 1990s, BMW took out whole-page advertisements telling you this car was now better to drive because much of the suspension was now made out of aluminium, including, I think, the uprights, potentially the wishbones too. In fact, I think most of the front suspension is aluminium, as are parts of the rear. That's quite good. It's McPherson strut up that way, in case you are wondering, and at the back they have an arrangement they call the Z-axle, which is a sort of multi-link affair that I believe they nicked off the E39 7 Series. Should you want a slightly more luxurious car, that is one that is worth looking into, but of course it will be just a touch less dynamic than this. And honestly, right about now, I'm having a good time. It's not the last word in feel, engagement or anything else, but it feels perfectly sized for these roads, and it is an absolute joy. Performance is adequate, space is adequate, the thing is styled beautifully, car people will appreciate it for what it is, but to everybody else, it's just an old BMW. And there's a lot to be said for that, particularly if you live somewhere like London, where apparently it is now borderline impossible to own a modern day Range Rover. Oh, lovely, lovely engine. The kickdown can be a little bit unpredictable from the gearbox in sport, so if you're serious about having fun, I would say manual mode is still well worth having. Unfortunately, there are no wheel-mounted paddles or anything like that. Alpina did do a few versions of these, and they built some buttons into the wheel to give you the sort of effect, and I do one day have to get myself into an Alpina E39. They are seriously cool. Fuel economy? Well, I'd love to be able to tell you, except it is in kilometers per litre, which I don't understand, but I think on average these will do sort of in the 20s when you're on a run, and of course quite a bit less around town, but that's because it's a V8. They will all drink when they're not going anywhere. There is one other issue that this car has, and it's one that actually you may be able to help Alex with, which is because this car is a Japanese import, he has struggled to find a certificate of conformity for it. And this is something you might have heard a lot about recently, because there are a number of cars that are of a certain age which are actually compliant with modern ULEZ regulations, including those in London, which is a problem for Alex. And if you can get your hands on a certificate of conformity for your car proving it actually meets the emissions regs ahead of time, then you don't have to pay your daily fee, whatever it may be. But this car being Japanese, Alex has really struggled. The fact is that underneath, he's checked, he's looked, and he has been told the engine, the exhaust, everything, it is identical to the European equivalent. It has all the catalysts and things in place to meet the modern regulations. But getting a certificate of conformity to prove that has been the devil's own task. So if somebody out there happens to know where he might be able to get a COC for a Japanese import E39, please hop into the comment section down below or email me on talk@jayemm.com, and I would love for us to be able to help him out, because he says regardless, he is keeping this car. He adores it. He loves it. For a short while, it did actually live with a first generation Audi S8, the D2. Is that Tommy in front of me? Oh, and I believe I'm now following another YouTuber, B7TMY. Tommy, clean the back of your car, please. That's filthy. It's embarrassing. The S8, unfortunately, turned out to be nowhere near as good as he was promised by the dealer, and so that wound up getting returned, and this now is essentially his primary weekend and occasion car. He doesn't need really anything Monday to Friday, so fortunately the ULIS bit hasn't proven to be too much of an issue. And he was sensible, I think, in not deciding to chop this for a European-sourced variant that he might have had an easier time getting a certificate for, because he knows that this car is now a known quantity, and therefore he knows what's been done to it, he knows the condition that it's all in, and the fact is the vast majority of these out there, I would say, are going to need a fair amount of money spent, particularly if you're thinking of buying one at sort of £4,000 to £6,000, which I often see them being sold for, even less for the 6-cylinder and diesel examples. Those are cars that are going to need a lot of work. You could easily spend the purchase price almost straight away, particularly if you like your cars to be in good condition. But if you can find a decent, nice, enthusiast-owned example of a car, yes, you're going to be paying more than you would have done for it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Get over it. What you'll end up with is a beautifully proportioned, plenty powerful enough, nice to drive, easy to use, practical, daily drivable, and seriously cool piece of German kit that really does deserve its reputation as one of the best cars ever made. Now I really need to revisit the E39 M5, and if someone's feeling particularly brave, I need to revisit the E46 M3, because only this morning I was trying to talk Alex out of buying one of those. But am I perhaps judging that model too harshly as well on account of my own poor experiences? If you've got one and you think it's a good one, I'd love to drive it. I'd also like to drive a CSL, but they're daft money, so I'm not sure that's going to happen. In any case, I want to say a big thank you to Alex for bringing the car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.